Some new claims today that the U.S. may be fighting a proxy war with Syria. Sources telling Fox News that the CIA is providing intelligence information to the Syrian opposition, and they might be doing even more. American Special Ops forces are training Syrian rebel fighters in Jordan. Well, first of all, I want to ask, is this a situation, are you completely convinced it's not, that we're training rebels and we really don't know who they are?
Well, I suspect we know who they are. I do believe the open sources that are reporting that the Central Intelligence Agency has organized a training effort. I don't know if our special ops are actually involved in that or not. It's likely that they probably would be. I think this is largely a good effort. I suspect they're training leaders as who can go back and pass that training on, to their troops.
A Fox News alert, and just within the last hour, we got word that American journalist Steven Sotloff of Time magazine, held by ISIS, reportedly has been beheaded in Syria by ISIS terrorists. That in the same manner of James Foley, beheaded a little more than a week ago. With more for us now, Elon Berman, Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council. I suppose everybody feared the worst for Steven Sotloff. The United States clearly has been making inroads against ISIS with the air campaign there. That's what has them so angry, and they want to turn our stomachs, essentially, by killing another American in perhaps the most barbaric way imaginable, Elon.
No, I think that's right, but I think it actually goes beyond that. What you're looking at is a message, a continued message from ISIS to the United States. The administration has been, I think, very leery to talk about the fact that with the Foley beheading, ISIS was trying to send a message to the United States, effectively that it's coming, that it's irreconcilably opposed to the United States. We've talked a lot about a coalition of the willing. We've talked a lot about the fact that this isn't really a war. This is sort of something else. It's an internal conversation. But the message in the Foley beheading and also the message today with the Sotloff beheading is very clear that ISIS is irreconcilably opposed to us, and they're coming.
And our reaction is supposed to be what? I mean, they essentially, when they beheaded James Foley, they said, look, if you don't back off, if you don't stop your air campaign, we're going to do the same thing to Steven Sotloff. Well, now they've done that.
No, I think that's right. And part of their messaging to us is that, they were trying to deter us from acting. Clearly, the stakes in the current struggle with ISIS are far broader than simply one person. But for ISIS, it's a matter of credibility to demonstrate that now that they've said that there will be consequences for continued U.S. military action, that they follow through. This is part of a larger conversation. Does it suggest that, that we are being effective in this military campaign, this air campaign that has, accomplished things like taking back the Mosul Dam from ISIS, released the Yazidis, released the Turkmen in Amerli? Well, I think there's no question that we've been successful on a tactical level, but we should be talking strategy here. The administration, I think, very tellingly said last week that it, quote, doesn't have a strategy yet for dealing with ISIS. I think part of the reason it's leery to talk about this is the fact that a real long-term strategy to defeat ISIS means effectively going back to Iraq, to do more nation building, to prop up a more stable, more inclusive political government, and as a result, deny the political breathing room for ISIS that it currently has. That's a long-term project. Well, obviously, Americans' stomachs are turned when we see the kind of thing that they are releasing. What is the propaganda value? What's the propaganda effect of taking the heads off of these innocent journalists? Well, I think it's very clear. In much the same way that al-Qaeda would flout the Western laws of war post 9/11, that ISIS is taking a stand. It's demonstrating that what it's doing is deadly serious, that it is willing to go to all lengths imaginable in its attempt to recreate and then hold its new caliphate. And as a result, that not only U.S. soldiers, but also U.S. civilians, because after all, journalists are civilians, are fair game in this conflict. It's a warning. With both of these men, apparently, with James Foley and with Steven Sotloff, they dressed them in those bright orange jail uniforms, the kind that prisoners wear at Gitmo. They're trying to,
they're trying, I guess, to tie the barbaric kinds of treatment that they give our prisoners to the essentially very good treatment that we have given to Islamic prisoners at Gitmo.
Well, I think there's part of that, certainly. It makes for very good imagery. The colors pop. There is a correlation between the captured journalists and sort of, at least that they're trying to build, and prisoners at Gitmo. But there's a larger, I think, narrative that's taking shape here, is that unlike the United States, unlike the countries of the West, Al-Qaeda and more recently ISIS, they have no interest in following the Geneva Conventions. They have no interest in holding prisoners, in POWs, in sort of civilized rules of warfare. For them, this is all-out combat.
And Elon, I want to bring in Bret Baier now. He's the anchor of Special Report here on Fox News. Bret, obviously White House spokesman, quite cautious with preliminary words and reaction on this barbaric act. What more can you tell us that you're hearing from the White House now?
Not so much from the White House. Obviously, this came out during the briefing, so it was developing as that briefing was ongoing. So Josh Earnest could not say much other than the prayers went to the family there, and that they were working to authenticate whether this was true or not. Obviously, this video has since surfaced. Intelligence officials privately had told us that this may have been in the works for a few days, that this may have happened days ago, and that the video takes time to surface, and that the confirmation coming today. Obviously, it's horrific. It's another image, just like James Foley, that shows the brutality of ISIS and their goals. And, you know, this is a signal, and they're using it for a propaganda tool. What's happening about ISIS and what the U.S. policy is about going after ISIS is really the question. In Iraq, it's not in question. There have been obviously dozens and dozens of U.S. airstrikes that have had an effect on ISIS. But in Syria, that's the question going forward after last week and the president's signal that they had no strategy is to take out ISIS in Syria as of yet.
And as you know, these latest airstrikes alongside Britain and a couple of other countries as well, the locals there are saying that they were fighting alongside the local militia and that they are crediting them with the success. So as the U.S. administration perhaps contemplates moving forward with perhaps airstrikes in Syria, they are cautioned by the WHO is alongside the fighters that they're trying to back. Does this play into this even further now with this latest news of this one more barbaric act by ISIS?
Sure. I mean, listen, this is all this giant global geopolitical three-dimensional chess, if you will. There are a lot of different parts to this. The horrific act of this beheading obviously takes front and center right now as this video surfaces. But you have a battle between Sunni and Shia that is centuries old, that continues in the Middle East. And then you have the moderates versus the extremists, and that is what you heard Prime Minister David Cameron talking about, the extremist ideology that has really been the start of ISIS from the beginning.
Stick with us if you could. We're going to take you over to the State Department where Jen Psaki, the spokeswoman, is answering some questions about this reported beheading of Steven Sotloff. Now let's listen.
Do you know when you were made aware of this? Was it before this extremist monitoring group put it out, or do you know if the intel community was aware of it before then?
I'm not sure there's more I'm going to be able to say, Matt. I'm happy to take it and see if there's more we can on that front. Go ahead, James.
Right. I will defer to James.
Go ahead.
Does the Obama administration consider this an act of war?
We certainly, I'm not going to put new labels on it, James. I would say we certainly consider this act, this reported act, the act of the killing of James Foley as a horrific terrorist act that we certainly has helped, or has not helped to, I should say, has been one of the motivating factors in the effort to undergo the creation of an international coalition to address this threat.
So now we have on the books 2 American journalists beheaded by this group. Is there any doubt on your part or the part of this administration that, in fact, the United States is at war with ISIS?
Well, I think I want to be very careful here, just that we have not confirmed through the proper processes, and I just need to restate that as a U.S., speaking on behalf of the U.S. government. I know that wasn't your intention. I'm not going to, again, put new labels on it. I think it's clear that we are concerned about the threat of ISIL to Western interests, to interests in the region. That's why the Secretary, the President, Secretary Hagel are all going to be working every contact they have to continue to build a coalition to address this threat.
Will this event make any difference in our planning vis-a-vis airstrikes against ISIS?
There are a range of factors, as you know, that are taken into account, including the interests of the United States. And I'm not going to read out further what the President will be looking at, but certainly we look at a range of factors as those decisions are made.
I just want to try to address this one more way. A lot of Americans sit at home and they see Americans who are not even combatants but who are journalists being beheaded by this group overseas. And from a sort of common sense point of view, the average American will say to himself, this group is at war with us. Why does our president or our Secretary of State not recognize that and say, indeed, we are at war with this group and we will destroy them?
Well, I think, first of all, James, our actions speak for our commitment to this. And the President has authorized more than 100 strikes in Iraq, as has been confirmed by the Department of Defense. There are a range of reasons, but part of it is to take on the threat of ISIL. Part of the reason we are leading the effort, and the United States has done more than any country in the world, whether it's humanitarian assistance or other military efforts, to take on this threat in Iraq. So I think any American sitting at home should sit and look at the actions that we're taking. I don't think it's a useful exercise to go back and forth about new terms. What's important is what we're doing about it, and the President's authorization, what the Secretary will be doing over the next couple of weeks is action in that regard.
But Jen, I thought that the President's authorization, or what he authorized the airstrikes for, was not necessarily to take on the threat by ISIL, except as it relates to the humanitarian situation of the minority communities like the Yazidis and these other, the Turkmen community, and then to protect U.S. military and diplomatic personnel and facilities. You would argue that that goes to also taking on the threat
of Matt,
ISIL,
I think
the broader threat that they pose to Americans, but also American civilians, but Brits, but other nationalities?
Well, one, that's only part of what our effort is. But speaking to that particular point, obviously impacting the capabilities of ISIL in Iraq because of the concern we have about humanitarian issues, whether it's Amerli or the communities around Erbil, as well as the national interests of the United States, including the safety and security of American citizens. There certainly is an impact on the capabilities when we take those actions.
Okay, fair enough, but those are actions that are being taken in Iraq, or what was part of Iraq. The original, the Foley video, and this one, presumably, it looks similar, I think. I was under the impression that people were generally of the opinion that it was filmed in Syria.
Well, Matt, though I think regardless, ISIL has not differentiated between geographic boundaries. That's why, obviously, there are a range of options the President will consider. But we've already taken actions in Iraq to address this threat and to defend United States interests.
Right, but to date, the administration has only, publicly at least, confirmed one operation inside Syria, and that was the rescue mission.
Yes,
right?
That's correct. That hasn't changed.
So the argument that you're taking on the threat of ISIL with the President's authorization for those two specific things, humanitarian and protection of U.S. personnel facilities, would apply only to Iraq at the moment, correct? Not to Syria.
That's correct, Matt. However, That's only part of our effort, and obviously ISIL and the threat it poses to the region has a trickle-out effect from Iraq, from Syria, from other places. But the second piece, which is also vitally important, is our effort to build an international coalition. A number of countries have taken steps, humanitarian steps, steps to provide military assistance in Iraq. As a result, and we're going to continue those discussions.
Right. But again, all within Iraq and nothing within Syria, which is where this problem began.
I understand, Matt, but I also think
a lot of people would suggest that the administration's, the president's reluctance to do more to oppose the extremists in Syria has resulted in this situation.
In what capacity?
Well, I mean, they became a major fighting force and
well, when you say
over the
this
border
situation, what are you referring to?
Well, I'm referring to the widespread criticism in the foreign policy community or whatever, even outside of that community, that not enough was done to fight this threat while it was relatively contained within Syria, and that's why it has mushroomed out.
Well, I would disagree with that, and I think there's obviously several components of this, which is why it's a complicated issue. But one is the threat of ISIL has grown, and their strength has grown over the last several months. Our assistance has also grown over the course of time to the moderate opposition in Syria, but also to the Iraqi security forces. We've also undergone several efforts over the course of that time to address this threat. So it's not as if our response to this is new. Their growth has been increasing over the last several months, as has our assistance and our effort to combat it.
But if, like some people allege, that ISIS terrorists themselves have nullified the border between Syria and Iraq, why the holdback? Why is, let's say, their bases in Syria are not being struck? If they themselves have, basically, they say that the border ceased to exist.
Well, Saeed, I'm not going to rule options in or off the table. Obviously, the president has the prerogative to make decisions. You're familiar with the fact that there are a range of contingency options. That's always the case. But I'm not going to get ahead of where we are. We've been clear that the geography is not going to limit our options, but there's no new decisions to announce.
And you mentioned the strikes. Do we have any kind of figure or any kind of data or guide on how much ISIS capabilities have been degraded by these strikes?
I don't have any statistics in that regard.
Let's go back to the video. Have you been in touch with Mrs. Sotloff's family this morning?
These reports just came out. I would have to check on that, Joe, and see.
And did you, I don't know if you saw in the video that they are also threatening to kill a British citizen as well, which they say they're holding. Do you have any information about him? Or
I don't have any additional information to provide. If that changes over the course of the afternoon or evening, we're happy to provide it.
And have you been in contact? I know it's just happening, but have you already been in contact with your counterparts in London on this? Or
well, again, this happened in the last. The reports came out publicly in the last 30 minutes or so. So I would have to check and see if there have been contacts. I'm certain that one of the first calls we would make is to the UK, which wouldn't be a surprise.
What is the legal authority under which President Obama has launched the more than 100 airstrikes that you just referenced?
In Iraq? Well, the Iraqi government has invited the United States in to help them address this threat, and that is the legal authority.
And he has reported to the Congress on this subject, has he not?
Yep.
Under what aegis? Under the aegis of what statute?
Well, it's he does war powers authorizate or acts every time there is a need to notify Congress.
So we have a commander-in-chief who has launched more than 100 airstrikes at a given enemy, who is reporting to the Congress under the aegis of the War Powers Act, who is watching our people beheaded by this enemy, but who, for some reason, feels queasy about saying that we are in fact at war with this enemy.
James, I think I'm not going to put new words into the mouth of the President of the United States. My point is that his actions to authorize these strikes, his effort to send Secretary Kerry, Secretary Hagel, any resource we have in the United States to lead the building of a coalition, speak to his commitment to taking on this threat. And of course we want to see ISIL destroyed, but that is not an overnight effort.
Can I just ask one more thing about the administration's broader thinking on ISIL/ISIS, and that is it still the administration's position that it is President Assad who is to blame for the growth of this group and its mushrooming
In Syria, yes, and that he's been a magnet for terrorism, that certainly has not changed in our view.
Okay.
Our position.
Okay, so without Assad there, you think that this would have not this would have been different. This wouldn't have happened. I realize it's a hypothetical, and I realize you can't prove a negative, but you believe if Assad had been gone years ago, ISIS would not have gained the foothold, the stronghold that it has.
Well, clearly, Matt, obviously there are other parts of the region where ISIL has gained some strength, but
Right.
they have been provided with a safe haven that has helped lead to the building of their strength. And obviously the attraction of individuals who have aligned with them has been in part the result of the brutality and the actions the Assad regime
And you
has
believe
taken.
that safe haven was provided by President Assad?
I think you are the president of a country where some of these terrorists.
Okay, because
safe
his
havens have
argument
grown.
and the argument of his allies, the Russians and the Iranians, for example, has been that he has been fighting these people the entire time, and it's not him that's provided a safe haven, but that by supporting his opponents, you all have made it, turned it into this cauldron of I don't know what you want to call it, cauldron of instability and extremism.
Matt, I think there's a bit of revisionist history there going on, where this is an individual who has brutally killed 200,000, almost 200,000 of his own people, and certainly there's been a building of opposition to him over the course of the last several years. Now, the direction that results in is, of course, we're also concerned about the growth of ISIL.
But isn't it true, though, that one of your allies, Turkey, has allowed these fighters to go in almost unchecked to this area and basically congregate and create this kind of force? Isn't it true?
I'm not sure what you're referencing, saying if there's a report or something that you'd like to send to us.
Let me be more direct. Turkey is one of your allies. It's a NATO ally. It's a strong friend of the United States. Many of these fighters that go into Syria that have morphed into ISIS have actually come through their border.
We work closely with Turkey to address this threat and to also work closely on counterterrorism efforts. I don't think I have anything more for you, and I'm not sure.
Do you think that Turkey is incapable of controlling its border, that has become so porous that they cannot control it?
Not at all what I said. Go ahead.
Just follow up from last week about the U.S. is asking Turkey to seal the border with Syria. Did you have any kind of response from Turkey or any?
I don't have anything new for you on that.
About the global coalition you have been talking about, is there any detail right now how the work of building this coalition is going on?
Well, I think it's important for everybody to note that there are already steps that a range of countries have taken to address this threat in Iraq, but still we're talking about the threat of ISIL. I would give you just a couple of examples, which you're familiar with, but I think it's worth noting. Canada has pledged to provide humanitarian assistance.
Jen Psaki, the State Department spokeswoman there, tap dancing around a bombardment of questions from reporters there, including our own James Rosen. Let's go to Brett Baer, who's still with us in Washington. I thought it was interesting, Brett, when she said, I think it's clear we are concerned about the threats of ISIL to the region. You compare that with what President Obama had to say in that New York Magazine interview back in January. ISIL is suddenly of great concern to this administration.
Yeah, I think you add this to the reporting of Catherine Herridge, who has this, a couple of different officials confirming that the PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief, had very detailed and granular, in those sources' words, layout of the threat from ISIS in Syria and throughout the region for at least a year, that no policymaker, in those words of those sources, could come away thinking that this isn't bad. You think about that, and then James questioning at the State Department about whether to call this an act of war or not. You saw Jen Psaki, the spokesperson at State, not wanting to, in her words, get into the semantics. But the bottom line is this is war with this group.
Steven Sotloff apparently has given his life in pursuit of journalism. I'm sure much more ahead tonight on Special Report. Brett Baer, thanks for joining us.